Imagine having this truly visionary, life-changing idea, right? But before you can even begin to build it, you have to spend, I don't know, 90% of your waking hours translating that beautiful dream into sterile spreadsheets for some stern bank manager.
Right, yeah, which sounds awful.
It sounds like a corporate nightmare, but that is actually the literal day-to-day reality of the modern artist. So whether you are staring down the barrel of a massive creative project yourself, maybe battling some heavy artist procrastination, or you're just insanely curious about what keeps people creating despite all the odds, today's deep dive is exactly what you need.
Absolutely, because there is this fundamental tension in all creative work.
Yeah.
It's this crushing systemic reality of being an artist, constantly clashing with the transcendent internal payoff of just making something true.
And we have two incredible sources mapping this out today. First, there's a documentary series by the artist Double O Roos titled The Artist, which is this real-time record of the creative grind. And second, we have a really deeply reflective piece that breaks down the psychology of that rare moment when creative work finally clicks.
Yeah, and that contrast is everything.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with a tension that is this, well, vast?
I mean, we really have to start with the machinery, because to understand why artists create, that pure intrinsic motivation,
Right.
we first have to understand what they're actually up against, the environment they operate in. And W. Roos's 10-part series is just invaluable here.
Because it's not a retrospective, right?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not looking back from the safety of success. It is recorded right there in the trenches. It traces a single project from the very first proposal all the way to the exhibition context.
Oh, wow. So it's totally real time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just disposes all the structural, financial, and frankly, psychological conditions that completely dictate contemporary art.
Which is such a huge departure from how we usually consume these stories, you know? Usually you only hear about the journey after the fact.
Oh, for sure. The classic success story.
Yeah, like the artist is standing in some pristine gallery holding a glass of champagne, telling this highly polished, romanticized story about their struggle. And it feels so inevitable. But this documentary is literally rolling tape while the outcome is totally unknown.
And that uncertainty is the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
The series deliberately foregrounds all the mundane, agonizing stuff. You see the artist navigating endless subsidy applications, dealing with cultural policy, and just absorbing outright rejection.
Which is brutal.
It is. And the text makes this really vital distinction. Rejection in this ecosystem isn't an anomaly. Doesn't mean your art is bad. It is a normalized structural condition of the industry.
Wait, rejection as a structural condition, that's wild. But I guess it makes sense. It means in a field where subjective taste meets, finite public funding, mathematical probability says you'll be rejected 90% of the time, regardless of your talent.
Yes. Exactly. It's not a critique of your work. It's just the weather of the environment.
The weather, that's a great way to put it. But surviving that weather must require immense psychological endurance.
Oh, absolutely. And beyond just needing a thick skin, the series dives into how these external economic pressures actively mutate the art itself. It shows how public funding directly shapes creative decision-making.
Right, so it's not just that writing grants is annoying. It's like trying to compress a massive high-definition 4K video file into a tiny pixelated zip folder just so it fits in an email attachment.
That is a perfect analogy.
You have this nuanced emotional vision, but you have to strip away the beauty to cram it into institutional buzzwords like civic engagement quotas or something. You're just forcing the institution to hit download.
And doing that creates this massive cognitive burden. When an artist spends more time translating their work for bureaucrats than actually making it, it totally alters their relationship with their own practice.
I can imagine that just breeds severe creative block.
Oh, completely. The brain just starts to rebel against the inauthenticity of the whole translation process. You start second-guessing your own ideas. You aren't wondering, is this good anymore? You're wondering, is this fundable?
Which is a terrifying pivot for an artist. And then, on top of all that funding anxiety, the documentary introduces these modern existential threats too, right? Like the looming question of authorship with emerging tech like AI.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. Because if an algorithm can essentially mimic the aesthetic output of a human, then what is the artist's actual value?
It just forces a complete recalibration of identity.
Exactly. If the value isn't just in the final product, since a machine can generate a product now, the value has to reside in the process. The series argues that a contemporary artistic career isn't sustained by stability or mastering one medium.
It's sustained by endless negotiation.
Endless negotiation, persistence, and just continuous recalibration against all these systemic forces.
Recalibration. You try an approach, you hit a bureaucratic wall, you adjust your pitch, you get rejected, you pivot again, over and over. I mean, it sounds utterly exhausting.
It is deeply exhausting.
So if 90% of the job is managing spreadsheets, navigating structural rejection, and facing this fear of failure with AI, why not just be an accountant? What is the actual psychological payoff? They must be chasing a high that the rest of us just don't understand.
Well, that brings us right to the core of the second source, which explores the stark contrast to that whole external grind. It looks at the purely internal, transcendent act of making.
Right, isolating that elusive moment of arrival, the moment the work finally clicks.
Exactly. The piece is actually titled, "Nothing Compares to Making." And it describes this exact moment where, after all that prolonged uncertainty, the creative block, the procrastination, and the systemic noise, suddenly something holds.
The image clicks.
Yes. The sentence lands. The structure just stops collapsing under its own weight. It's this profound neurological shift. The source describes how everything that was fragmented and chaotic suddenly becomes coherent. The labor recedes, and you are just left with this unmistakable quiet recognition. You just know. This is it.
I hear that, and it sounds amazing, but I'm trying to picture the reality of it in the studio because pop culture has aggressively trained us to view this moment as this massive, euphoric explosion.
Oh, the classic Hollywood montage.
Yeah, the artist screams, "Eureka!" Throws paint at the canvas in a frenzy, or the composer furiously scribbles notes with tears streaming down their face. Is that the kind of high we are talking about here?
What's fascinating here is that the source text goes out of its way to dismantle that exact Hollywood trope. It explicitly states that this experience is not euphoric in a superficial manic sense.
Wait, really? It's not.
No, not at all. The magic of this moment is not found in its intensity. It is found in its accuracy.
Accuracy over passion. Wow, that is a completely different paradigm.
It's a state of profound alignment. Think of it like tuning a physical instrument. When a string is out of tune, there's friction, there's dissonance.
Right.
But when you slowly tighten the peg and hit the exact mathematical pitch, there isn't an explosion. There is a physical resonance, a settling. The dissonance just disappears.
It makes so much sense.
The source describes this as the feeling that something has arrived in the exact form it needed to take, without any excess. The work simply is.
Like the puzzle piece sliding perfectly into place. And the text also mentions this fascinating side effect of that accuracy, which is an element of surprise.
Yeah, that part is crucial.
It says that when the work succeeds and finds that perfect alignment, it feels less like control and more like collaboration.
Which really speaks to the dissolution of the ego during a state of flow. The text suggests that when this deep alignment occurs, it feels as if the work passed through the artist, rather than being forcefully authored by them.
Oh, wow.
The conscious, anxious mind, the part that worries about subsidies and AI and career trajectory, it just steps aside.
You become the conduit. But, to be clear to the listener, this isn't just accidental magic, right? It doesn't just happen to anyone sitting around waiting for a muse.
No, absolutely not. And that is a really crucial mechanism to understand. This feeling of collaboration is the direct result of discipline.
Right.
You have to show up long enough for something larger than your own intention to take shape. You have to put in the hours, overcome that fear of failure, and build the scaffolding before the work can actually pass through you.
Meaning you have to endure all that soul-crushing administrative recalibration we talked about in the first half just to keep the studio lights on, so that you are physically sitting in the chair when that moment of accuracy finally arrives.
Exactly. That is the ultimate trade-off. The grind protects the space where the arrival can occur.
Okay, so this internal feeling of accuracy is completely divorced from the external world of grants, galleries, and cultural policies. They operate on entirely different frequencies.
Completely different.
So why does this internal satisfaction outrank external success? Why does making matter more than validation?
It really comes down to stability. The source highlights a massive psychological trap that nearly all creators fall into. They spend years chasing external approval, believing that if they can just get enough applause, it will finally cure their internal self-doubt.
Which is, honestly, the most relatable human impulse ever. We all do it. If the critics say I'm good, if my peers like my post, if the exhibition sells out, then I will finally believe I am a real artist. We just completely outsource our self-esteem.
We do. And the text explains exactly why that outsourced self-esteem fails. External approval is inherently unstable. because it relies on mechanisms you cannot control.
Like cultural timing or shifting aesthetic tastes.
Exactly. Access to the right platforms, algorithmic visibility, it is a constantly moving target.
And the fatal flaw of external validation is that the moment it inevitably fades, the second the gallery closes or the social media feed moves on, the silence is deafening. The uncertainty just rushes right back in to fill the void.
Because you never actually resolved the doubt in the first place. You just temporarily drowned it out with noise. Making, however, the pure act of creating something true operates on a totally different axis.
It's internal.
Yes, it is internal, absolute, and self-verifying. When the work hits that point of accuracy, it carries a deep satisfaction that simply cannot be outsourced. It does not require witnesses to be real.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I hear it's an internal, self-verifying moment, and that sounds philosophically beautiful. But let's be real, artists still have to pay rent.
True.
They still have to buy groceries. Isn't telling a struggling artist who is drowning in debt that money and validation don't matter just a romanticized form of toxic positivity?
It absolutely would be if that were what the text was claiming. But the source makes a vital razor-sharp distinction here to avoid exactly that trap.
Oh, okay.
When you enter the studio, it explicitly acknowledges that artists absolutely need income, platforms, and opportunities to survive.
Okay, phew. So it's not just live on air and good vibes.
Not at all. But it draws a hard line between two concepts: conditions versus reasons.
Conditions versus reasons. Break the mechanics of that down for me.
So think about the environment. The subsidies, the gallery representation, the audience applause, the income, those are the conditions. They are the necessary structural requirements to sustain a life and a practice in our current society.
Because recognition is relative and money is transactional.
Right. You need them to keep the lights on and buy the materials. But they are not the reason you're doing it in the first place.
The grant is what pays for the canvas. It's the condition.
Yeah.
But the specific, perfect shade of blue you put on that canvas, well, that's the reason.
Exactly. The pure internal alignment of making that blue sing is the core motivation. The conditions allow you to pursue the reason. But the moment you confuse the two, the moment you start painting a different shade of blue just because you think it will win the grant or get the applause, you have let the condition cannibalize the reason. You are stepping right back into the trap of unstable external validation.
That distinction is a lifesaver, honestly, because it validates the frustration of the administrative grind. Translating your vision into institutional language, fighting for funding, you aren't doing that because it's your passion. You are just managing the conditions.
Right, exactly.
But that quiet moment in the studio where the structure finally holds, that is the reason. That is what justifies the bureaucratic nightmare.
It clarifies priority perfectly. It reminds the artist why the solitude, the procrastination, and the internal fight were worth enduring. Not because of what the outcome will bring in the marketplace, but because of the alignment itself.
So you battle the system, you manage the conditions, and you finally achieve that profound, absolute moment of accuracy. But let's look at the life cycle of that moment. Can an artist just live in that state of alignment forever? Once you lock in that puzzle piece, are you cured of the struggle?
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
And the source confronts this heartbreaking reality head-on. These moments of true creative alignment are incredibly fragile.
Fragile meaning they break down.
Fragile, meaning they cannot be forced, and they cannot be sustained indefinitely. No amount of willpower, discipline, or funding can conjure that exact feeling of accuracy on demand. They appear, they hold for a brief transcendent window, and then they vanish.
Just like that.
Just like that. The painting is finished, the essay is published, and the next morning the artist wakes up and has to start all over again, facing a blank slate, the exact same creative block, and the exact same structural precarities.
That sounds like a cruel joke, honestly. You spend months climbing the mountain, you get a 5-minute glimpse of the perfect unobstructed view, and then you are immediately teleported back to the bottom to face the exact same mud and rain. How does anyone survive that psychological whiplash without quitting?
They survive it because of memory. There's a crucial saving grace to this whole cycle. While the moment of alignment itself vanishes, the memory of it lingers permanently.
It stays with them.
It does. The source emphasizes that once an artist has experienced this level of profound accuracy, once they know what it actually feels like to make something fundamentally true, they cannot unknow it.
It physically alters their baseline. It becomes the ultimate reference point.
It does. And that reference point is what fuels the discipline required to climb the mountain all over again.
So what does this all mean? How do we take this deep dive into the specialized, often agonizing world of contemporary artists and apply it to you, the listener?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completes the narrative loop of everything we've discussed today.
Hmm.
Think back to the heavy institutional grind documented by Deep Obai O. Russ, the subsidy dependency, the AI anxiety, the structural rejection.
Yeah, the crushing weight of it all.
How does anyone endure that? They endure it by returning to that lingering memory of internal alignment. Status is relative, the market is fickle, but that memory of making is absolute.
It's the anchor in the storm. When you are drowning in self-doubt or you are staring at a spreadsheet wondering why you even bother, that memory is the quiet knowledge that at least once something incredibly real passed through your hands.
And that knowledge changes the calculus of your life.
Yeah.
It is the sole reason why, despite all the structural barriers and the precarious economics, the creative work continues. Because once you know that feeling of true making, you realize there is absolutely no substitute for it in the external world. You can't buy it and you can't fake it.
Let's pull all of these threads together. We started today by staring down the massive inherent friction between the machinery of the modern world and the reality of the creative mind. Through the lens of the artist documentary, we saw just how demanding the conditions of a career really are.
Right, the normalized rejection.
The cognitive burden of bureaucracy, the need to constantly translate your truth into a compressed zip file just so an institution can understand it. We saw how that systemic weight breeds resistance and doubt.
The relentless management of conditions.
Exactly. But then we crossed over into the pure, self-verifying reason for enduring it all. We explored that grounded, almost tuning fork moment when the work stops fighting you, when the dissonance clears and you realize you have achieved accuracy.
It's such a powerful shift.
We learned that chasing external validation is a trap because it outsources your self-esteem to a moving target, but internal alignment is an absolute state. And the simple, fleeting memory of that alignment is the fuel that gives a creator the strength to face the blank page and the broken system over and over again.
It perfectly distills why the act of creation is simultaneously the most exhausting and the most intrinsically rewarding endeavor we can undertake.
It really is. It reframes everything. It makes me look at every piece of art, every well-crafted sentence, and every thoughtful design in a completely different light. Somebody had to fight a massive external system and their own internal doubt just to protect the quiet space required to make that thing exist.
And that brings up a final thought, something vital to reflect on, even if you don't consider yourself a professional artist.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Think about your own life, your own job, or your own routines. How much of your time is spent managing the conditions of your life versus actually engaging with the reasons?
That is a heavy question.
If the ultimate reward of creation is a fleeting internal moment of alignment, a quiet accuracy that absolutely does not require an audience or a paycheck to be real, how does that change the way you view your uncelebrated hobbies, your daily tasks, or those hidden passion projects you keep tucked away? What if the simple, quiet act of doing them right, of finding your own internal alignment, is the only applause you ever actually needed?
That is the perfect place to leave it. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Protect your reasons, manage your conditions, and we will catch you next time.